The scream tore through the clinic before the door even opened. Elena Voss dropped the bandage roll in her hand and spun toward the sound, her heart slamming against her ribs. It was almost midnight, and the border clinic was supposed to be empty except for her. She worked the night shift alone most weeks, treating whoever came in from the forest edge, no questions asked. That was the deal she had made with herself when she took this job. No questions, just help. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of the man who stumbled through her door. One hand pressed hard against his side, blood soaking through his shirt in a dark, spreading circle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room the moment he crossed the threshold. His eyes found hers immediately, sharp and gold in the dim light, and for a strange moment, Elena forgot how to breathe. "I need help," he said, his voice low and rough, each word forced out through clenched teeth. Elena snapped back into motion. Years of training took over, pushing aside the strange flutter in her chest. She grabbed gloves from the box on the counter and rushed toward him, guiding him to the exam table before he could collapse. "Sit down. Let me see it," she said, already reaching for scissors to cut away the ruined fabric of his shirt. He hesitated, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, then finally obeyed, lowering himself onto the table with a controlled, careful movement that told her he was used to hiding pain. She peeled back the fabric and sucked in a breath. The wound across his ribs was deep, jagged, clearly not from any accident she had treated before. It looked like claw marks, 4 parallel gashes, deep enough to need serious stitching, yet somehow already beginning to close at the edges in a way that made no medical sense at all. "What happened to you?" she asked, reaching for antiseptic. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Just close it. It matters if I'm going to treat it properly. This looks like an animal attack. I need to know if there's a risk of infection, rabies, anything." "There isn't," he said, cutting her off with a certainty that left no room for argument. Elena pressed her lips together and focused on the wound instead of pushing further. She had learned not to argue with patients who came from the forest side of town. They always had secrets, and most of the time, those secrets were none of her business. She cleaned the wound carefully, watching him from the corner of her eye. He did not flinch once, not even when the antiseptic should have burned. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some distant point past her shoulder, as though he were somewhere else entirely. "You're not from around here," she said quietly, trying to ease the tension in the room. "I would remember a face like yours." For the first time, something flickered across his expression, not quite a smile, but close. "You wouldn't want to remember me," he said. "Trust me on that." She glanced up at him, surprised by the strange weight behind his words. "That's an odd thing to say to someone stitching you back together." "It's the truth." His golden eyes locked onto hers again, and this time, there was something else beneath the sharpness, something almost like warning. "You should forget this ever happened. Forget you saw me." Elena's hands paused over the wound. "I'm a nurse. Forgetting patients isn't really part of the job." "This isn't about the job," he said, his voice dropping lower, quieter, more urgent. "It's about staying safe. You don't understand what you're dealing with." A cold feeling crept up her spine, but she forced herself to keep working, tying off the final stitch with steady hands, despite the way her pulse had begun to race. "Then explain it to me." He was silent for a long moment, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, quieter, almost gentle, though the words themselves were anything but comforting. "Stay away from me," he said. "Stay away from the forest. Stay away from anything that comes out of those trees after dark. I mean it." Elena stepped back, pulling off her gloves, unsettled by the intensity in his gaze. "You're bleeding all over my exam table, and warning me to stay away from you. That's a first." "I'm serious." "So am I," she said, crossing her arms. "You're the one who walked in here. I didn't come looking for you." Something like frustration crossed his face, quickly buried beneath a mask of calm control. He stood from the table, testing his side, and to her disbelief the wound that had needed a dozen stitches, only minutes ago, now looked days old, the swelling already fading, the skin knitting together in a way that defied everything she knew about the human body. "How is that possible?" she whispered, staring at the wound. It isn't, for people like you, he said simply. He reached for his torn shirt, pulling it back over his shoulders, despite the blood still staining it. At the door, he paused, glancing back at her one last time. The warning in his eyes was unmistakable now, sharper than before. Forget my face. Forget this clinic exists on nights like tonight. If you're smart, you'll move somewhere far from this town before the next full moon. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside as quickly and silently as he had appeared, leaving Elena standing alone in the empty clinic, with nothing but a blood-stained exam table and 100 unanswered questions racing through her mind. She should have listened to him. She would think that many times over the following weeks, but that night, standing in the quiet clinic, with her hands still trembling, all Elena felt was a pull she could not explain, a strange certainty that whatever had just walked out of her clinic was not finished with her yet. She locked up an hour later than usual, checking the exam table twice to be sure she had cleaned every trace of blood away, as though erasing the evidence might erase the memory too. It didn't. All the way home, walking the narrow road that cut along the edge of the forest, she kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see those golden eyes watching her from the shadows. They weren't there. Not that night. But 3 nights later, they were. Elena noticed it first as a prickling sensation on the back of her neck while she closed up the clinic, the kind of feeling that told her without question she was being watched. She told herself it was nerves, leftover unease from the strange encounter earlier that week. She locked the door, gathered her bag, and started down the road toward her small rented house at the edge of town. The forest ran alongside the road the entire way, thick and dark, the kind of tree line that swallowed light whole once you stepped past its edge. Elena kept her eyes forward, walking a little faster than usual, telling herself it was simply the late hour making her jumpy. Then she heard it, a soft rustle among the leaves, matching her pace exactly, moving parallel to her along the road just inside the tree line. She stopped walking. The sound stopped too. "Hello?" she called out, hating how small her voice sounded in the stillness. No answer came, but she caught the faintest gleam of eyes reflecting back at her from the darkness between the trees, low to the ground, unmistakably not human. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a slow step backward, and the eyes tracked the movement precisely, patient and unblinking. A wolf. It had to be a wolf, though something about its stillness, its calculated patience, felt entirely unlike any wild animal she had ever heard of. Wolves did not usually watch a person with that kind of intelligent, deliberate focus. Elena's mind raced back to the man from the clinic, to his warning about the forest, about the full moon, about staying away from anything that came out of the trees after dark. She turned and walked quickly toward home, refusing to run, refusing to give whatever was watching her the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The eyes followed her the entire way, always keeping just out of clear sight, until she reached her porch and slammed the door shut behind her, sliding the deadbolt into place with shaking hands. That night she barely slept, and when she finally did drift off, her dreams were filled with golden eyes and a low, rough voice telling her to run. The following morning, Elena told herself she had imagined the whole thing, exhaustion and stress playing tricks on her mind after a long night shift. She went about her day at the clinic as usual, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the wound that had healed too fast, to the warning that had felt far too specific to be nothing more than a stranger's paranoia. By the end of the week, the strange feeling of being watched had not faded. If anything, it grew stronger. Twice more she caught glimpses of eyes in the tree line on her walk home, and once, she was almost certain she saw the shape of a large, dark wolf, standing motionless, at the very edge of the road, before it melted back into the shadows the moment she blinked. She began locking every window in her house, not just the doors. She began parking closer to the clinic entrance instead of walking the long way. She told herself these were reasonable precautions for a woman living near unfamiliar wilderness, nothing more. But deep down, a small and persistent voice kept whispering that this had everything to do with the man who had walked into her clinic bleeding and left healed, the man whose warning had sounded less like advice and more like a secret he desperately did not want her to uncover. On the 9th night since his visit, Elena worked a double shift at the clinic, covering for a colleague who had called in sick. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the front door swung open again, and this time she recognized the tall figure immediately, even in the dim lighting. He looked different from before. No wound this time, no blood, dressed simply in dark clothes that seemed to make him blend into the shadows behind him. His golden eyes swept the empty waiting room before settling on her. "You didn't leave," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. Elena set down the chart she had been reviewing, her pulse quickening despite herself. "I have a job, a life. I'm not going to abandon both because a stranger told me to. I told you it wasn't safe." "You told me a lot of strange things," she said, crossing her arms. "You never told me your name." He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Damien," he finally said. "Damien Ashgrove." "Elena Voss," she replied, though she suspected somehow he already knew that. "Why are you here, Damien? You're not injured this time." "I came to see if you listened to my warning." Clearly I didn't. A muscle in his jaw tightened, though whether from frustration or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. "You should have." "Why? What exactly am I in danger from?" "You show up bleeding, you disappear, then something starts watching me from the forest every single night. If you want me to take a warning seriously, you're going to have to give me a reason." For a moment, she thought he would turn and walk away again, retreating behind that same wall of secrecy he had hidden behind before. Instead, he crossed the room slowly, stopping only a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the way his eyes seemed to shift color slightly in the light, gold deepening to something almost amber. "There are things in this world," he said quietly, "that most people never have to know exist. Dangerous things, things that hunt, that claim territory, that do not take kindly to outsiders wandering too close to what belongs to them." "Are you talking about wolves?" Something flickered across his face again, that same almost smile from before. "Something like that. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now." He studied her a moment longer, and then, quieter, almost reluctant, he added, "The eyes you've been seeing in the forest, they're not random. Someone has taken an interest in you, Elena, and where I come from, that kind of interest rarely ends well for someone who doesn't understand what's happening." A chill spread through her chest. "Then explain it to me. Help me understand." "I can't," he said, and for the first time she heard something like genuine regret beneath the sharpness of his voice. "The less you know, the safer you'll be. Just trust me. Stay inside after dark. Keep your doors locked, and if anything unusual happens, anything at all, you find a way to reach me." He pulled a small folded piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the counter beside her, a phone number scrawled across it in quick, sharp handwriting. "Why would you help me?" Elena asked slowly, "if you're the one telling me to stay away from you?" Damien's expression shifted, something complicated and unspoken passing behind his golden eyes. "Because staying away from me was never really about protecting yourself from me," he said quietly. "It was about protecting you from everything that comes looking for someone like you." Before she could ask what that meant, he was already moving toward the door, his tall frame disappearing into the night, with the same silent grace as before. Elena stood alone in the clinic once more, staring down at the folded paper on the counter, her mind spinning with more questions than answers. Someone like her, what did that even mean? She didn't sleep again that night, replaying his words over and over, trying to piece together the strange puzzle he refused to fully explain. Whatever secret he was protecting, whatever danger truly lurked in those dark trees beyond the clinic, Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty as she finally watched the sun rise over the horizon. She was not going to simply walk away from this. Not now. Not when the warning itself had only pulled her in deeper, wrapping itself around her curiosity like a hook she could not shake loose. Whatever Damien Ashgrove was hiding, whatever danger truly watched her from the shadows of that forest, Elena intended to find out the truth, no matter the cost. She folded the paper with his number and slid it into her pocket, and for reasons she could not yet explain, her hands were no longer trembling. Something had changed the moment their eyes met that first night in the clinic, something neither of them had chosen, and neither of them could undo. And though Elena did not yet understand what that meant, She felt it settle into her bones like a certainty she had never known before. This was only the beginning. Word had already begun to spread through the trees before Elena even reached the clinic parking lot the next evening. Damien felt it the moment he crossed back into pack territory, a low hum of unease rippling through the bond he shared with every wolf under his protection. He had not meant for anyone to notice his visits to the human clinic. He had been careful, or so he thought, choosing hours when the town slept and the roads sat empty. But wolves noticed everything, especially when their alpha's scent changed. Marcus found him at the edge of the training grounds just after sunset, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the way that always meant trouble. "You've been to see her again," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Damien didn't bother denying it. She needed to understand the danger. "Or you needed an excuse to see her again," Marcus said flatly. "Damien, the pack is already talking. Your scent has changed. It's all over you, mixed with something none of us can quite place. You know what that means." Damien's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what it meant, though he had refused to let himself think the word since the first night he had walked into that clinic bleeding and left with something far more dangerous than a wound. "It means nothing," he said. "She's human." "Is she?" Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone made Damien go still. "What are you saying?" "I did some digging, like you asked." Marcus lowered his voice, though there was no one else nearby to overhear. "Her mother disappeared from Redthorn territory 26 years ago, pregnant. No trace of her was ever found. Not by her own pack, not by any of the neighboring territories. She simply vanished." Damien's blood ran cold. "You're certain?" "I cross-checked the records twice." Elena Voss was born 7 months after her mother disappeared, in a town 300 miles from any known pack territory. Her mother resurfaces 2 years later, alone, refusing to speak about what happened, and dies not long after, in what the human authorities called a car accident. No pack ever claimed the child. No pack ever came looking for her. "Until now," Damien said quietly, almost to himself. "Until now," Marcus agreed. "Which means either you're the first one to notice what she really is, or someone else already knows and has been waiting for the right moment to make a move." Damien thought of the eyes in the forest, the ones Elena had described with barely concealed fear when he questioned her about it the night before. He had assumed it was simply pack members curious about the change in his scent, watching from a distance, out of instinct rather than any real threat. Now a colder possibility took root in his mind. "Increase the patrols along the eastern border," he said, quietly. "I don't want the human authorities noticing extra wolves in the area, and I don't want Elena noticing either. Not yet." "And what about her?" Marcus asked. "If she really carries wolf blood, dormant or not, she deserves to know the truth. You can't keep warning her away without ever explaining why." Damien's silence stretched long enough that Marcus eventually turned and walked away, leaving him alone at the edge of the training grounds with nothing but the wind moving through the trees and the weight of a decision he was not ready to make. Elena's life did not slow down enough to give her time to think clearly, no matter how much she needed it. The clinic filled up faster than usual over the following days, an unusual number of patients coming through the doors, with injuries that made little sense. A young man with deep scratches along his forearm that he claimed came from a fall in the woods, though the marks looked nothing like any fall Elena had ever treated. A woman with a sprained ankle, who flinched violently every time Elena so much as mentioned the full moon rising later that week. Each patient seemed to request her specifically, refusing treatment from any other nurse on staff, watching her with a strange, careful attentiveness that unsettled her more with every passing shift. "It's like they're testing me," she confided to her closest friend at the clinic, a sharp-tongued young woman named Isla, who had worked alongside her for the past 2 years. "Testing you for what?" Isla asked, raising an eyebrow as she restocked a supply cart nearby. "I don't know. That's what's bothering me." Elena rubbed her temples, exhaustion pressing heavy behind her eyes. "Ever since that man came in bleeding a couple weeks ago, everything's felt off. Like the whole town suddenly noticed I exist." Isla's expression sharpened with curiosity. "The one with the eyes you couldn't stop talking about?" "I only mentioned that once." "You mentioned it 4 times, Isla said, smirking despite the tension in the room. You've got a type, apparently. Mysterious, broody, disappears into the night. Elena managed a tired laugh, grateful for the brief moment of lightness even as unease continued to churn beneath the surface. It's not like that. He's dangerous, Isla. He told me himself to stay away from him. And are you? Elena hesitated, thinking of the folded paper still tucked safely in her jacket pocket, the phone number she had already memorized without meaning to. I'm trying, she admitted quietly. But it doesn't feel like something I get to choose anymore. That evening, walking home along the familiar road beside the forest, Elena felt the same prickling awareness she had grown used to over the past 2 weeks, the sense of unseen eyes tracking her every step from somewhere within the trees. She had almost stopped being afraid of it, the fear slowly shifting into something closer to resigned wariness, though tonight the feeling carried a different weight, sharper and more deliberate than before. She reached the edge of her street, just as a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead of her, blocking the path. Elena's heart lurched, her hand instinctively reaching for the small canister of pepper spray she kept clipped to her bag. But the man who stood before her was not Damien. He was different, leaner, with dark hair and pale gray eyes that studied her with unsettling calm. Elena Voss, he said, his voice smooth and pleasant in a way that immediately put her on edge. I've been wanting to meet you. Do I know you? She asked, keeping her distance, her pulse hammering. Not yet, he said, offering a smile that did not reach his eyes. My name is Kian, and I think you and I have a great deal to discuss. Elena glanced past him toward the safety of her street, weighing whether she could outrun him if needed. I don't talk to strangers who ambush me on dark roads. Fair enough, Kian said, unbothered, his gaze sweeping over her with an assessing quality that made her skin crawl. Then let me just say this, and you can decide for yourself whether it's worth your time. Damien Ashgrove has not been honest with you. Not about who you are. Not about what's coming for you. If you want the truth, the real truth, you'll find me far more forthcoming than he ever will be. Before Elena could respond, Kian stepped back into the shadows just as smoothly as he had appeared, disappearing between the trees with an ease that left her standing frozen on the empty road, her mind racing through everything he had said. Damien Ashgrove has not been honest with you. She already suspected as much. But hearing it confirmed by a total stranger, someone who clearly knew far more about her situation than she did herself, sent a fresh wave of unease crashing through her chest. Walking the rest of the way home, Elena pulled out her phone and stared at the folded paper she had tucked away, Damien's number scrawled across it in sharp, hurried handwriting. Her thumb hovered over the keypad for a long moment, before she finally typed out a message, her hand steadier than she expected, given the storm of questions swirling in her mind. We need to talk. Someone named Kian just approached me. He says you're hiding something. I want the truth, all of it, or I stop trusting either of you. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then stood on her porch in the cool evening air, waiting to see what kind of answer, if any, would come back. The reply arrived faster than she expected. Only a few minutes later, 3 words that settled deep into her chest, with a weight she couldn't quite explain. Stay inside, now. Elena's fingers tightened around the phone. Whatever was happening, whatever truth Damien had been avoiding all this time, it was clear the moment had finally arrived where hiding it from her was no longer an option. She locked her door, checked every window twice, and sat in the darkness of her living room with her back against the wall, watching the tree line through the gap in her curtains, waiting. She did not have to wait long. The first attack came just after midnight, and it would change everything Elena thought she understood about the world she lived in. A crash sounded from the back of the house, glass shattering somewhere near the kitchen, followed immediately by a low, guttural snarl that did not sound remotely human. Elena scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to run, even as her legs seemed to lock beneath her. Shadows moved beyond the broken window, low and fast, more than one, circling closer with predatory intent she could feel in her bones. Then the front door exploded inward off its hinges, and Damien stood in the doorway, no longer entirely a man. His shoulders had broadened impossibly, his eyes glowing pure gold in the darkness, and for one terrifying, breathless moment, Elena understood with absolute certainty that everything Damien had warned her about was real, and that whatever was coming for her tonight had already arrived. "Stay behind me," he growled, his voice barely recognizable, and Elena, for the first time in her life, did exactly as she was told without a single argument. The rogue wolves came fast, 3 of them slipping through the broken kitchen window, with a speed that made the room feel impossibly small. Elena pressed herself against the far wall, watching in stunned disbelief as Damien moved to meet them, his body shifting further with each passing second, fur rippling along his arms, his jaw lengthening as a low growl tore from his throat. She had read about wolves as a child, watched documentaries about their grace and power, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of a man transforming into something far more dangerous right in front of her eyes. He was terrifying and, in some strange way she refused to examine too closely, magnificent. The first rogue lunged, and Damien met the attack head-on, driving the creature back through the shattered window with a force that splintered the frame further. Elena flinched at the sound, at the raw violence of it, but she did not look away, some instinct telling her that if she closed her eyes now, she might miss the moment everything went wrong. The second rogue circled toward her instead, sensing an easier target, its eyes locked on her with hungry focus. Elena grabbed the nearest object within reach, a heavy ceramic lamp from the side table, and swung it with everything she had the moment the creature lunged. It connected with a solid crack, staggering the wolf just long enough for Damien to close the distance and drive it back, with a snarl that shook the walls of the small house. "Get to the hallway," he barked, not looking back at her, every ounce of his attention fixed on the remaining threats. Elena obeyed instantly, scrambling toward the narrow hallway that offered at least some measure of protection from multiple directions at once. From there she watched the rest of the fight unfold in a blur of motion and sound, Damien moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible, driving back one attacker after another until the last of the rogues finally broke and fled into the darkness beyond her ruined kitchen. Silence fell over the house, broken only by Elena's ragged breathing and the distant sound of retreating footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Damien remained still for a long moment, chest heaving, before slowly straightening, his transformation reversing itself in a way that seemed to cost him considerable effort. By the time he turned to face her, he looked almost entirely human again, save for the faint golden glow still lingering in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the room quickly, his hands hovering near her shoulders, as though he wanted to check for injuries, but wasn't sure he had the right to touch her. "I'm fine," Elena managed, though her voice shook more than she wanted to admit. "What were those things?" "Rogues," Damien said grimly. "Wolves without a pack, without loyalty, without rules. Dangerous, unpredictable. Someone sent them here tonight." "Kian," Elena said immediately, remembering the encounter on the road only hours before. Damien's expression darkened at the name. "You spoke to him. He approached me. Told me you weren't being honest with me." She wrapped her arms around herself, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "He wasn't wrong, was he?" Damien's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing, simply staring at the wreckage of her kitchen, as though weighing exactly how much truth she could handle in one night. Finally, he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders loosening just slightly. "No," he admitted, "he wasn't wrong. There's a great deal I haven't told you, about what I am, about what's happening in this town, about what you might be, whether you realize it or not." "Then tell me now," Elena said, her voice steadier this time despite the chaos still ringing in her ears. "All of it. I think I've earned that much tonight." Damien studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his golden eyes, some final wall of resistance finally crumbling under the weight of everything that had just happened. He glanced once more at the broken window, the shattered door, the evidence of just how real the danger surrounding her truly was, and nodded slowly. "Not here," he said. "It isn't safe. Pack somewhere else to stay tonight, and I'll explain everything. All of it. I promise you that." For the first time since this entire strange ordeal began, Elena felt something other than fear settle into her chest as she looked at him. Not quite trust, not yet, but something close enough to hope that she found herself nodding in agreement, gathering what few belongings she could carry, and following Damien Ashgrove out into a night that had already changed the entire shape of her world. Elena sat across from Damien in a small, quiet cabin deep within Ashgrove territory, a fire crackling in the hearth as the last traces of adrenaline slowly drained from her body. Marcus stood near the window, arms crossed, keeping watch over the surrounding trees, while Damien finally began to explain everything he had kept hidden since the night they first met. "Wolves like us live in packs," he said, choosing his words carefully. "We're born this way, most of us. A bloodline passed down through generations, tied to the land we protect. I lead the Ashgrove pack. Kian leads Redthorn, our closest neighboring territory. For the most part, we've kept an uneasy peace between us for years." "And me?" Elena asked quietly. "Why does any of this involve me?" Damien exchanged a glance with Marcus before continuing. 26 years ago, a woman disappeared from Redthorn territory. She was pregnant at the time, and she was never found again, not by her pack, not by anyone searching for her. 2 years later, she reappeared far from any pack land, alone, refusing to explain where she had been or what had happened to her child. Elena's chest tightened, a slow, creeping realization beginning to take shape in her mind. "You're talking about my mother." Damien nodded slowly. "We believe so." Marcus confirmed the details through old pack records. "If it's true, it would mean you carry wolf blood, Elena. Dormant, most likely, buried so deep you've never noticed it, but real." The room seemed to tilt slightly around her. Elena pressed a hand against the arm of her chair, steadying herself. "That's impossible. I'm human. I've always been human." "Dormant bloodlines can stay hidden for an entire lifetime," Marcus said gently from his place by the window. "Sometimes, they never awaken at all. But sometimes, under the right circumstances, proximity to a strong pack, an alpha bond, something in the blood remembers what it truly is." Elena thought of the strange, undeniable pull she had felt toward Damien since the very first night in the clinic, the way her body had reacted to him in ways she could not logically explain. Suddenly, none of it felt quite so irrational anymore. "Why does this matter to anyone else?" she asked. "If it's dormant, if I don't even know how to access it, why would rogue wolves attack my home tonight? Why would Kian bother approaching me at all?" Damien's expression turned grim. "Because bloodlines like yours are rare, and they're valuable. Certain lineages, when awakened, carry the power to stabilize an alpha's bond, to strengthen an entire pack's connection to their territory. Some believe your bloodline in particular carries even more than that, an old, nearly extinct line believed capable of either strengthening or completely destabilizing whichever pack claims you." "So I'm a prize," Elena said flatly, anger beginning to cut through her fear. "Something to be claimed and fought over." "That's exactly what Kian sees you as," Damien admitted. "I refuse to see you that way." "Then why keep all of this from me? Why not just tell me the truth from the very first night, instead of pushing me away with vague warnings?" Damien's golden eyes softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "Because the moment you understood what you might be, it would put a target on your back that could never be removed again. I hoped, foolishly it seems, that if you never knew the truth, you might stay safe, ordinary, far from all of this danger." "That obviously didn't work," Elena said, gesturing toward the door, toward the memory of her shattered kitchen only hours earlier. "No," Damien agreed quietly. "It didn't." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any remaining trace of dishonesty, but found only quiet regret and something else. Something warmer, hidden just beneath the surface of his carefully controlled expression. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now you have a choice," Damien said. "You can walk away from all of this, and I will do everything within my power to protect you from a distance, keeping this world separate from your life entirely. Or you can stay, learn the truth of what you are, and accept that danger will follow you either way, whether you understand it or not." Elena thought of the eyes watching her from the tree line every night for weeks, of Kian's smooth, unsettling voice on the dark road, of the rogue wolves crashing through her kitchen window with hungry intent. There was no true version of walking away anymore, not really. "I want to understand," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty still swirling inside her. "I want to know what I am, all of it." Something shifted in Damien's expression, quiet approval mixed with something far more complicated, something that looked almost like relief. "Then we start tomorrow," he said. "And Elena, whatever happens next, I promise you this. I will not let Kian or anyone else claim you as some kind of prize to be fought over." Elena held his gaze, feeling that same undeniable pull settle deeper into her chest, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she allowed herself to believe him completely. 3 days later, a formal envoy arrived at the border of Ashgrove territory, and the entire pack seemed to hold its breath the moment word spread of who led it. Elena stood beside Damien near the edge of the Great Hall, a stone building that served as both meeting place and stronghold for pack business, watching a procession of unfamiliar wolves approach through the morning mist. At the front walked Kian, dressed now in formal dark clothing instead of the casual attire he had worn on the road that night, his pale gray eyes sweeping across the gathered crowd until they landed directly on her. "He's here for diplomatic talks," Damien said quietly beside her, though the tightness in his jaw suggested he trusted that explanation about as much as she did. Officially, at least. "And unofficially?" Elena asked. "Unofficially, he's here for you." The meeting began formally enough, Kian offering polished words about border disputes and hunting territory boundaries that had apparently caused minor tension between the two packs for years. Elena sat quietly near the back of the hall, watching the careful, practiced diplomacy unfold between two men who clearly despised each other beneath the surface courtesy. It was only when the formal business concluded and pack members began filtering out of the hall that Kian's true purpose became impossible to ignore. He crossed the room directly toward Elena, offering a smile that did not reach his cold gray eyes. "Elena Voss," he said smoothly. "It's good to see you safe after that unfortunate incident at your home." "You mean the attack you sent?" she said flatly, refusing to soften her words, simply because they stood surrounded by unfamiliar wolves. Something flickered across Kian's expression, quickly smoothed away. "A regrettable misunderstanding. Rogue wolves are difficult to control, and I assure you, I had nothing to do with such reckless violence." "Convenient timing for a misunderstanding," Damien said, appearing beside Elena with quiet, controlled tension radiating from every line of his body. Kian's smile sharpened slightly as he turned toward him. "Careful, Damien. Baseless accusations between allied packs tend to create far more conflict than they resolve." "We're not allies," Damien said coldly. "We're neighbors who tolerate each other." "There's a difference." The tension in the room thickened palpably, several nearby pack members shifting uneasily at the exchange. Kian, however, seemed entirely unbothered, his attention drifting back toward Elena with unsettling focus. "I understand you finally learned the truth of your heritage," he said. "I imagine that came as quite a shock." "You knew before I did," Elena said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I've known for some time," Kian admitted freely, no trace of guilt in his tone. "Bloodlines like yours don't stay hidden forever, not from those who know what signs to look for. I've had my people watching the borders for years, waiting to see if you would ever awaken." "And now that I have?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Kian's gray eyes gleamed with quiet ambition. "Now, I believe Redthorn could offer you a great deal more than whatever protection Damien has promised you. Power, purpose, a true place among your own kind, rather than hiding on the edges of a pack that only tolerates your presence out of obligation." "She's not a prize to be traded between territories," Damien snapped, stepping forward, his golden eyes flashing with barely contained warning. "No," Kian agreed smoothly. "She's a great deal more valuable than that. Which is precisely why I intend to make my case directly to her, rather than allowing you to make her decisions on her behalf." Elena felt the weight of both men's attention settle heavily upon her, each waiting to see how she would respond. She thought of Damien's warning that first night, of his insistence on protecting her even while withholding the truth she deserved to know, and she thought of Kian's smooth, calculated offers that felt less like genuine care and more like careful strategy. "I'm not choosing anything right now," she said firmly, meeting Kian's gaze without flinching. "Not until I understand exactly what all of this means, on my own terms, without either of you deciding for me." A flicker of respect passed briefly across Kian's expression, quickly replaced by calm, patient confidence. "Take all the time you need," he said smoothly. "I'm not in any particular hurry, but know this, Elena. Whatever Damien has told you about protecting you from danger, ask yourself honestly whether hiding you away like some fragile secret is truly protection or simply another kind of control." With that, he turned and departed the hall, his envoy following closely behind, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Elena remained still for a long moment, processing the weight of everything that had just been said, before finally turning to face Damien. "Is that true?" she asked quietly. "Are you protecting me or controlling me?" Damien's expression tightened, pain flickering briefly behind his golden eyes. "I don't know anymore," he admitted honestly, his voice rough with something that sounded dangerously close to vulnerability. "All I know is the thought of losing you to him terrifies me more than I'm willing to admit." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any trace of the same calculated manipulation she had sensed in Kian's words, and found none, only raw, unguarded honesty that unsettled her far more than any warning ever could. Whatever was happening between them, whatever strange, undeniable pull continued to grow stronger with every passing day, Elena understood now with absolute clarity that she stood at the very center of a conflict far larger than herself, caught between two powerful men who each, in their own complicated way, wanted to claim her as their own. And she had absolutely no intention of letting either of them decide her fate without her. Kian found her alone 2 evenings later, walking the quiet path near the training grounds, where Damien had begun teaching her small ways to sense the wolf blood buried within her. Elena tensed at the sight of him, but he raised both hands slightly, a gesture of peace rather than threat. "I only want to talk," he said, "nothing more." "You have a strange way of showing peaceful intentions," Elena replied, though she made no move to leave, curiosity winning out over caution. "Fair enough." Kian fell into step beside her, keeping a respectful distance as they walked. "I imagine Damien has told you a great deal about bloodlines, about power, about danger, but I wonder if he's told you the full truth about why he really pushed you away that first night." Elena's steps slowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "Ashgrove Pack history isn't exactly peaceful," Kian said carefully. "Years ago, before Damien became Alpha, his father made a claim on a woman from a similar dormant bloodline. The bond between them grew unstable, dangerous, ultimately destructive. She died as a result of that unstable bond, and the pack nearly tore itself apart in the aftermath." Elena's breath caught. Damien never mentioned that. "I imagine it's not something he enjoys discussing," Kian said, something almost gentle in his tone, despite the calculated nature of the conversation. "But it explains a great deal, doesn't it? Why he warned you away so forcefully that first night. Why he's kept you at arm's length even now, despite how obvious his feelings toward you have become to everyone around him." Elena absorbed this new information carefully, pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. It explained the fear she had sometimes glimpsed behind Damien's guarded expression, the hesitation in his voice whenever the subject of bonds or claiming arose between them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, studying Kian carefully. "Because you deserve the whole truth, not just the parts that suit whatever narrative benefits him most," Kian said simply. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Elena. I'm only asking you to make your choices with complete information, rather than half of it." They walked in silence for several minutes before Elena finally spoke again. "What would Redthorn offer me, if I chose your pack instead?" Something sharpened in Kian's expression. Quiet triumph carefully hidden beneath practiced calm. Stability. Safety among a pack that would celebrate your bloodline rather than fear its consequences. A place where you would never again have to wonder whether you were valued for yourself or feared for what you might become. It sounded appealing, dangerously so, and Elena found herself considering his words far more seriously than she expected to. But something about the ease of his offer, the practiced smoothness of every word, left a lingering unease she could not quite shake. That evening, she confronted Damien directly, repeating everything Kian had told her about his father, about the unstable bond, about the woman who had died as a result. Damien's expression shattered the moment the words left her mouth, old grief resurfacing with painful clarity. "It's true," he admitted quietly. sitting heavily across from her, near the dying fire. My father claimed her before either of them truly understood the risks. The bond destabilized within months. She suffered greatly before the end, and my father was never the same afterward. I watched that destruction happen as a child, Elena, and I swore I would never let something similar happen to anyone I ever cared for. That's why you pushed me away, Elena said softly, understanding finally settling fully into place. Yes, Damien admitted. I was terrified, not of you, but of becoming my father, of dragging you into something that could destroy you the same way it destroyed her. I convinced myself that keeping my distance was the only way to protect you. And now? Damien's golden eyes met hers, raw and unguarded in a way she had never seen from him before. Now I understand that pushing you away only made you more vulnerable, not less. Kian saw the gap I left and filled it with promises I was too afraid to make myself. What promises? Elena asked quietly. Stability, safety, a place where you belong. Damien's voice roughened. I can't promise you a bond without risk, Elena. I won't lie to you about that, but I can promise you this. Whatever happens between us, it will be built on truth, not manipulation. And I will fight with everything I have to make sure any bond between us strengthens you, rather than destroying you the way it destroyed her. Elena studied him carefully, weighing the fear and the honesty and the fragile hope tangled together behind his words, and felt something settle deep within her chest, a certainty she could not fully explain, but no longer wished to ignore. I don't want promises built on fear, she said finally. From either of you, I want the truth, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Then that's exactly what I'll give you, Damien said quietly, for as long as you'll let me. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees surrounding the cabin, carrying with it the distant, watchful presence of a rival pack still waiting patiently at the borders, and somewhere deep within her chest, Elena felt the first fragile stirrings of something that had been dormant her entire life finally beginning, slowly and carefully, to wake. The gathering hall glowed with warm firelight the night the entire Ashgrove pack assembled to mark the changing of the season, a tradition Damien explained had continued unbroken for generations. Elena stood near the edge of the crowd, dressed in clothing Isla had helped her choose earlier that week, feeling the weight of countless curious eyes upon her, as word of her bloodline had finally spread fully through the pack. They're not hostile, Damien murmured beside her, sensing her unease. Just curious. It isn't every day a dormant bloodline reappears among us. That's not exactly comforting, Elena admitted, though she found herself standing a little straighter under his steady presence beside her. The evening unfolded with music and quiet celebration, pack members offering cautious but genuine warmth toward her as the hours passed. Elena found herself relaxing slightly, laughing at a joke Marcus made about Damien's notoriously terrible dancing, when a sudden shift rippled through the room, subtle but unmistakable, like a change in air pressure before a storm. She turned to find Damien watching her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs, his golden eyes glowing brighter than she had ever seen them, something raw and instinctual replacing his usual careful control. Around them, the noise of the gathering seemed to fade into distant background, the world narrowing sharply, until only the two of them remained. Elena, he said, his voice rough, almost strained. Do you feel that? She did. A warmth spreading through her chest, spreading outward through her limbs. A pull toward him so powerful, it felt like gravity itself had shifted to center, entirely around his presence. Her pulse raced, not with fear this time, but with something deeper, something that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place she had never known existed until this very moment. What's happening to me? She whispered. The bond, Damien said, his voice barely steady. It's beginning to form. Around them, several pack members had gone quiet, watching with wide, knowing eyes, sensing the shift occurring between their alpha and the woman standing beside him. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks under the sudden attention, though the sensation pulling at her chest refused to be ignored or ashamed. Is this safe? She asked quietly, remembering everything Damien had told her about his father, about the danger of unstable bonds forming too quickly. I don't know, Damien admitted honestly, closing the small distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. but it feels nothing like what happened before. This feels steady, grounded, like it's choosing to happen naturally, rather than being forced. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of fear or hesitation, finding only quiet wonder mixed with careful restraint, as though he were holding himself back out of respect for her choice, rather than his own desire. "I'm not afraid," she said softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. Something shifted in Damien's expression, relief and hope tangled together, as he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished. She didn't. His hand found hers, warm and steady, and the moment their fingers intertwined, the pull between them intensified into something almost overwhelming, a current of warmth and recognition flowing between them that left Elena breathless. Across the hall, unnoticed by either of them in that charged moment, one of the pack members slipped quietly toward the exit, pulling a small device from his pocket to send a hurried, secretive message to someone waiting far beyond Ashgrove borders. Kian received the message within minutes, seated in his own private chambers back at Redthorn territory, and his expression darkened considerably as he read the brief words confirming his worst fear. "The bond has begun forming. If it completes, she will be lost to us entirely." He set the device down slowly, his mind already racing through every possible option remaining to him. He had waited patiently, calculating every move with careful precision, only to watch his advantage slip away in a single unguarded evening. Patience, it seemed, was no longer a luxury he could afford. "Gather the others," he said quietly to the wolf standing silently near his door. "It's time we accelerated our plans considerably." Back within the warmth of the Ashgrove gathering hall, entirely unaware of the storm quietly building against her, Elena stood hand in hand with Damien, feeling for the first time in her life a sense of belonging so profound it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Whatever danger still lingered at the borders of her new life, whatever complicated challenges remained ahead, in this single moment she allowed herself simply to feel the warmth of a bond, finally, naturally, beginning to bloom. It would not last nearly as long as either of them hoped. 3 days after the gathering, Elena noticed a young pack member named Owen lingering near the edges of her daily routine, more often than seemed natural. He offered to walk her to the training grounds each morning, appeared conveniently near the clinic whenever she visited town, and asked careful, probing questions about her schedule that she brushed off at first as simple curiosity from someone still adjusting to her presence within the pack. It was Marcus who first grew suspicious, noticing the pattern during a routine review of pack movements. He brought his concerns directly to Damien late one evening, his expression grave. "Owen has been in contact with someone outside our territory," Marcus said quietly, once he was certain they were alone. "I traced the communication pattern. It leads back to Redthorn." Damien's expression turned to stone. "You're certain?" "Certain enough to act on it," Marcus confirmed. "I believe he's been feeding information about Elena's schedule, her movements, her vulnerabilities, directly to Kian." Damien's hands clenched into fists at his sides, fury and fear tangling together in his chest. "Bring him to me." Owen was found within the hour, and under direct questioning from his alpha, his composure crumbled quickly, confessing everything in a rush of guilt and fear. Kian had approached him weeks earlier, offering considerable reward in exchange for information, promising protection and status within Redthorn once their plan succeeded. "What plan?" Damien demanded, his voice dangerously low. Owen swallowed hard, refusing to meet his alpha's furious gaze. "He intends to take her, force a claiming bond before yours can fully complete. He believes if he can bond with her before the connection between you and Elena solidifies completely, the pack elders will recognize his claim as valid, regardless of how it was formed." Cold horror settled deep in Damien's chest. A forced claiming bond, made without consent, was considered among the gravest violations possible within pack law, but he knew all too well that desperate men sometimes ignored laws entirely when driven by ambition. "When?" he demanded. "Tonight," Owen admitted, voice trembling. "He's planning to move tonight, while you're occupied with the Border Council meeting, scheduled for this evening." Damien's blood ran cold. The council meeting had been arranged weeks earlier, a mandatory gathering of pack leaders, that would require his presence for several hours, leaving Elena with reduced protection at exactly the moment Kian intended to strike. He turned immediately to Marcus. "Cancel the meeting, now." "Damien, if you cancel without explanation, the other packs will see it as weakness, possibly even provocation. You know the political consequences." "I don't care about politics right now," Damien snapped, already moving toward the door. "Elena's safety comes before any council meeting." But even as he rushed toward her, urgency propelling every stride, a cold certainty settled deep in his chest that he might already be too late. Elena had been walking home from an evening shift at the clinic when she first sensed something wrong, the familiar prickling awareness of being watched, sharpening into something far more immediate and threatening. She quickened her pace, reaching for her phone to call Damien, only to find 3 figures emerging from the shadows ahead of her, blocking the path entirely. "Kian," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear rising rapidly in her chest. "This is a mistake." "I'm afraid it's a necessity," Kian said, his usual smooth charm replaced by cold, calculated determination. "I gave you every opportunity to choose Redthorn willingly, Elena. I'm sorry it has to happen this way instead." Before she could react, one of the wolves accompanying him moved with startling speed, and Elena felt a sharp prick against her arm, some kind of sedative flooding quickly into her bloodstream. Her vision blurred rapidly, her limbs growing heavy and unresponsive, despite her desperate attempt to fight back. "You won't get away with this," she managed to gasp, her words slurring as darkness crept steadily inward at the edges of her vision. "I already have," Kian said quietly, catching her as her legs finally gave out beneath her. The last thing Elena registered before consciousness slipped away entirely was the distant, furious howl echoing through the forest, unmistakably belonging to Damien, and the desperate hope that somehow, despite everything, he would find her in time. Damien reached the spot on the road where Elena's phone lay shattered on the ground, only minutes after Kian's group had disappeared into the forest, and the scent hanging heavy in the air confirmed everything Owen had already told him. Rage and terror warred within his chest as he shifted fully, abandoning caution entirely in favor of raw speed, tracking the fading trail of Elena's scent, mixed with the unmistakable presence of Redthorn wolves. Marcus caught up moments later, several pack members following close behind, but Damien barely registered their presence. Every ounce of his focus narrowed entirely onto the fading trail leading directly toward the Redthorn border. Pack law was clear about crossing territory lines uninvited, especially during open conflict, but Damien no longer cared about laws or diplomatic consequences. Nothing mattered beyond reaching Elena before Kian could complete whatever forced bond he intended to force upon her. He crossed the border without hesitation, ignoring the immediate alarm that rippled through Redthorn territory the moment his presence was detected. Wolves emerged from the trees around him, some moving to intercept, but Damien tore through every obstacle with a ferocity born of desperation, following the trail relentlessly until he finally reached a clearing deep within Redthorn land where Kian stood waiting, Elena unconscious on the ground behind him, still slowly recovering from the sedative in her system. "You shouldn't have come alone," Kian said calmly, though tension radiated visibly beneath his composed exterior. "Release her," Damien growled, shifting back into human form just enough to speak clearly, though every muscle remained coiled with barely restrained fury. "I'm afraid that's no longer an option," Kian said. "The bond between you two hasn't completed. There's still time for me to claim what should rightfully belong to a pack capable of truly valuing her." "She isn't a prize to be claimed against her will," Damien snarled. "This ends now, Kian, one way or another." Kian's expression hardened, all remaining pretense of diplomacy vanishing entirely. "Then let it end the way it should have, from the very beginning." He lunged forward, shifting mid-motion, and Damien met the attack head-on, the two alphas colliding with bone-jarring force in the center of the clearing. The fight that followed was brutal and fast, each combatant drawing on years of strength and instinct, neither willing to yield an inch of ground. Damien fought with the desperate fury of a man protecting everything he had come to love, while Kian fought with the cold, calculated ambition of a man refusing to accept defeat after years of careful planning. Elena stirred slowly on the ground nearby, consciousness returning gradually as the sedative finally began wearing off, her mind struggling to process the violent scene unfolding before her. She watched in horror as Damien took a heavy blow to his side, staggering slightly before recovering, and something fierce and protective ignited deep within her chest, a feeling entirely unlike anything she had experienced before. Without fully understanding what she was doing, Elena pushed herself upright despite her weakened state, feeling a strange warmth building rapidly beneath her skin, an instinctual power she had never accessed before rising sharply to the surface. Her vision sharpened, her senses expanding rapidly beyond anything she had ever known, and she felt her body shifting for the very first time, an unfamiliar but undeniably natural transformation rippling through her. She moved instinctively, driven by pure protective instinct rather than any conscious plan, positioning herself between Damien and Kian just as the Redthorn Alpha prepared to deliver what looked like a decisive blow. Kian's eyes widened in genuine shock at the sight of her, fully shifted for the first time, standing fierce and unyielding despite having awakened her abilities only moments earlier. "This isn't possible," Kian said, stunned. "Believe it," Elena growled, her voice rougher than she had ever heard it, carrying an unfamiliar strength that surprised even herself. Together, she and Damien turned to face Kian as a unified front, and the tide of the confrontation shifted decisively. Kian, recognizing the impossible odds now stacked against him, especially with several Ashgrove pack members finally catching up and surrounding the clearing, made one final desperate attempt to fight before ultimately being forced to yield, pinned firmly beneath Damien's greater strength, with Elena standing fiercely at his side. "This is over," Damien said, breathing heavily, refusing to release his hold despite Kian's continued struggling. "You violated every law our packs have honored for generations. The Council will decide your fate now, not you." Kian's resistance finally faded, defeat settling heavily across his features, as reality caught up with the shattered remains of his ambition. Redthorn wolves, witnessing their alpha's humiliating defeat and the clear violation of sacred pack law, began withdrawing their support almost immediately, several stepping forward instead, to formally denounce his actions before the gathered witnesses. Elena, still adjusting to the overwhelming sensations coursing through her newly awakened body, slowly shifted back toward her human form, exhaustion crashing over her in sudden, dizzying waves. Damien caught her instantly as her legs weakened, holding her steady against his chest with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the brutal fight only moments earlier. "You came for me," she whispered, voice hoarse with exhaustion and lingering shock. "I will always come for you," Damien said quietly, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead, relief and love mingling openly in his exhausted expression. No matter the cost. Around them, the clearing slowly settled into an uneasy calm, the immediate danger finally neutralized, though both of them understood clearly that the events of this night would carry consequences reaching far beyond this single confrontation. For now, however, none of that mattered nearly as much as the simple, overwhelming relief of being together again, safe, and finally free from the shadow of threat that had followed them relentlessly for weeks. 2 weeks passed before the Council formally announced its decision regarding Kian, stripping him permanently of his position as Alpha and placing Redthorn under careful oversight, while a new leader was chosen from among its more honorable members. The peace between the two territories, though still fragile, began slowly rebuilding under new, more trustworthy leadership committed to honoring the boundaries and laws that Kian had so recklessly ignored. Elena spent those 2 weeks adjusting to her newly awakened abilities, guided patiently by Damien and several other pack members, who took genuine joy in teaching her the parts of herself she had never known existed. She learned to control her shifts gradually, to sense the subtle rhythms of the forest around her, to recognize the deep, steady pull of the bond that continued to grow stronger between her and Damien with each passing day, no longer uncertain or feared, but embraced fully by both of them. On a quiet evening beneath a sky full of stars, Damien found her sitting near the edge of the training grounds, watching the moon rise slowly over the tree line, with a peaceful expression that had been rare during the turbulent weeks before. "You look happy," he said softly, settling down beside her. "I am," Elena admitted, leaning into his familiar warmth without hesitation. "It's strange. A few months ago, My entire life felt ordinary, predictable. Now everything feels different, bigger. Sometimes it's overwhelming. Do you regret any of it? Damien asked quietly, genuine vulnerability beneath the question. Elena considered this carefully before answering, her gaze drifting toward him with quiet certainty. No, she said. Not one moment of it. Not even the parts that terrified me. Because all of it led me here, to this, to you. Damien reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with the same gentle warmth that had first sparked their bond weeks earlier. That first night, when I warned you to stay away from me, I meant it as protection. I was so afraid of becoming my father, of causing you the same pain he caused my mother, that I nearly pushed away the one thing that could have made me stronger instead of weaker. And now? Elena asked softly. Now I understand that real strength isn't found in isolation, Damien said, his voice steady and sure. It's found in trusting someone enough to let them stand beside you, even when everything in you wants to protect them by pushing them away. Elena's eyes glistened with quiet emotion as she studied him, seeing clearly now the full weight of everything he had carried silently for so long. I chose this, she said firmly. I chose you, Damien, not because of bloodlines or prophecy or fate, because somewhere along the way, despite every warning, despite every danger, I fell in love with you completely, on my own terms. Damien's expression softened completely, all remaining traces of guarded restraint finally melting away entirely. Then let me ask you properly this time, he said quietly, rising to his feet and drawing her up gently beside him. Elena Voss, will you complete this bond with me? Not out of fear, not out of danger, but simply because it's what we both truly want? Elena felt warmth spreading through her entire body, the same steady, grounded certainty she had felt the very first night this bond began quietly forming between them. Yes, she said, without a single trace of hesitation. Completely, and forever. The ceremony that followed several weeks later brought together both packs in a rare display of unity, old tensions finally beginning to heal beneath the shared celebration of a bond formed freely, honestly, and entirely without coercion. Elena stood beside Damien, beneath an arch of flowers and firelight, surrounded by the pack that had become her true family, feeling more complete and certain of herself than she ever had before. As the final rites of the ceremony completed, sealing the bond between them permanently, Elena felt the last remaining pieces of herself settle fully into place, her human heart and her long-dormant wolf spirit finally united as one. Damien's golden eyes met hers, filled with a love so steady and unwavering that every fear either of them had once carried faded quietly into distant memory. Stay with me, he whispered softly against her ear, echoing the very first warning he had ever given her, though now the words carried an entirely different meaning altogether. Always, Elena promised, smiling as she rested her forehead gently against his. There's nowhere else I would rather be. Beneath the same stars that had watched over their turbulent, dangerous beginning, Elena Voss and Damien Ashgrove finally stepped fully into the life they had both fought so hard to protect, no longer haunted by warnings or shadows, but bound together completely by a love that had proven, in the end, far stronger than any danger that had ever tried to tear them apart.